So, the Epstein files just became a national farce. And if you think this is just about bureaucratic delays, you're missing the bigger picture. We were promised full transparency. Congress passed a law with a hard deadline, December 19th. That deadline came and went. And now, 7 weeks later, we're getting letters from Attorney General Pam Bondi explaining how hard everyone is working. Because according to Bondi's own statements back in February 2024, she said she wanted all the Epstein files in her office. By July, she and Kash Patel announced they'd reviewed 300 gigabytes of records. So they had the capacity, they had the resources, they had nearly a year. Yet here we are, with excuse after excuse and virtually nothing released. But let's slow down for a second. To understand what's really happening here, we need context about how this system actually works. Okay, quick transparency moment, and you've probably already noticed you're watching an AI avatar right now, but don't let that fool you. Every piece of analysis you're hearing, every connection we're making, every data point we're examining, that's real research done by me and my team. The avatar is just the messenger. The insights are 100% human. Just wanted to be upfront about that. Now, back to the mechanics. Congress passed this law specifically to force disclosure. The entire point was to override the typical bureaucratic gatekeeping that keeps sensitive files buried for decades. They set a deadline, not a suggestion, a legal requirement, for December 19th, 2024. The law was explicit. Release the records. Redact only victim names. Everything else goes public. In theory, this should have been straightforward. The FBI had already conducted their own review back in summer 2024. According to reports at the time, higher-ups in the Bureau were particularly interested in what agents were finding, or more importantly, not finding. That alone should tell you something. When leadership is that interested in the contents before public release, it's not just about logistics. The Department of Justice employs thousands of attorneys. Thousands. They have FBI agents, FBI analysts, and access to personnel from other agencies like ICE and Homeland Security. For comparison, private law firms routinely review millions of documents in civil litigation cases, often with teams far smaller than what the federal government can deploy. A major corporate lawsuit might involve 2 to 3 million records that get processed in months, not years. The federal government, with unlimited resources and a direct congressional mandate, can't manage the same task in 7 weeks. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While Bondi claims the DOJ lacks sufficient resources to process Epstein files, that same Department of Justice has simultaneously launched an aggressive campaign to obtain voter registration files from 24 different states, and is actively litigating in those 24 jurisdictions to force compliance. Think about that resource allocation for a moment. They have enough lawyers to pursue 24 parallel legal battles across the country, demanding sensitive voter data under legally questionable authority. But they don't have enough people to fulfill a congressionally mandated deadline on files that were supposed to be their top priority. And this is the crucial point. Congress explicitly made the Epstein file release the DOJ's top priority for 30 days. That's not the Department of Justice's decision to make. The executive branch's job is to faithfully execute the laws Congress passes. Congress sets priorities. The DOJ implements them. So when Bondi sends letters saying, we're prioritizing this, she's not doing the DOJ a favor. She's literally just doing what the law requires. Except she's not actually doing it. Let's connect the dots. The official explanation is that there are just too many records, too many locations, too complex a review process. And at first glance, it seems reasonable. These are sensitive files involving a massive criminal conspiracy, multiple jurisdictions, classified information, ongoing investigations. Of course it's complicated. But when you look at the actual timeline, it doesn't add up. Bondi announced in February 2024 that she wanted these files. By July 2024, she and Kash Patel publicly stated they'd reviewed 300 gigabytes of material. That's substantial. That indicates the files had already been collected, digitized, and at least partially examined. So what happened between July 2024 and December 2024? And more importantly, what's happened in the 7 weeks since the legal deadline? According to legal analysts, including those at Democracy Docket, Congressman Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna proposed a solution. Appoint a special master. This is a standard legal mechanism. You bring in a retired judge, someone with unquestionable credentials and no conflicts of interest, give them access to resources, and let them manage the review and release process independently. It removes the political pressure from DOJ, ensures transparency, and would likely accelerate the timeline considerably. The judge overseeing the Maxwell case didn't accept this proposal, apparently believing he lacked the authority to impose it. But here's what is remarkable. That kind of judicial deference is exactly what allows this delay to continue. The federal judiciary operates under a tradition of assuming good faith from the Department of Justice. When the Attorney General files a letter saying, "We've moved heaven and earth," judges tend to take that at face value rather than questioning whether the excuse is legitimate. This isn't the first time we've seen this pattern. Recently, a federal judge demanded the head of ICE appear in court for violating court orders. Over and over, we see judges expressing frustration with executive branch noncompliance, but rarely imposing meaningful consequences. The system is designed to trust DOJ representations, and that trust is being exploited. Who actually benefits from this delay? Let's think about the incentives structurally. For anyone potentially implicated in the Epstein files, every week of delay is valuable. These aren't just historical documents about a dead financier. These are records that allegedly contain information about powerful individuals, politicians, business leaders, foreign dignitaries, who were connected to Epstein's network. The longer those names stay hidden, the longer reputations remain intact, the longer careers continue undisturbed. It's not that Pam Bondi is necessarily corrupt in some traditional sense. It's that the system rewards caution. If she releases files prematurely and something goes wrong, legitimate privacy violations, national security concerns, diplomatic incidents, she faces political consequences. But if she delays, the worst that happens is criticism from commentators and a few irritated members of Congress. No sanctions, no enforcement, no real penalty. For the White House, the calculation is similar. The Trump administration came into office promising transparency on Epstein. But now, controlling the DOJ, they have access to those files before anyone else. They know what's in them, and they can make strategic decisions about what gets released, when, in what order, with what redactions. This isn't speculation, it's exactly what the evidence suggests. In Bondi's latest letter to the judge, she mentions that videos are part of the review, and that those videos require redaction. Now, obviously you redact victims' faces for their protection, but something tells me the redaction of those videos will be broader than that. According to analysts who've examined the initial 12,000 documents released, the redaction patterns already exceed what the statute allows. The law says redact victim names. That's it. But documents are coming back with extensive redactions that seem to go far beyond protecting victims. We've seen this before. When classified documents get released through FOIA requests, agencies routinely overclassify and overredact, claiming national security or law enforcement sensitivity. Then years later, after litigation, those same documents get re-released with fewer redactions, and it turns out the censored information was just embarrassing, not sensitive. What actually happens is this. DOJ reviews records. Higher-ups want to know what's in them. Not because they're concerned about process, but because they need to understand the political implications. Remember those reports from summer 2024 about FBI leadership being particularly interested in what agents were finding? That's the mechanism. Information flows upward. Decisions get made about what's releasable and what's too sensitive. And what's too sensitive often correlates suspiciously with what's too politically damaging. Through this review process, DOJ can effectively control the narrative. They can release less controversial material first, establishing a pattern of, look, we're being transparent. Then when more damaging information eventually comes out, if it comes out, it's drip-fed in ways that reduce impact, gets buried in the news cycle, or comes with enough redactions that the full story never emerges. If this continues, we can expect a pattern where each document release generates headlines about transparency, while the actual substance remains hidden. For media outlets, especially legacy media, that's ideal. They get to report Epstein files released without having to navigate the uncomfortable specifics. For independent journalists and platforms, the ones who would actually put the documents on screen and walk through them systematically, each release becomes a partial story, never the complete picture. Meanwhile, according to Bondi's own timeline projections, this review could take months more, maybe years. And with each passing month, public attention fades. The story becomes old news. By the time the most incriminating records might be released, if they're released, the political landscape has shifted. People have moved on, and the impact is minimal. For the individuals potentially named in those files, this delay isn't just bureaucratic inconvenience, it's strategic protection. Every month those names stay hidden is another month of normal life, normal business, normal political influence. The incentive to drag this out is enormous. So what does all this mean in practice? In the immediate term, we can expect more letters from Bondi, more explanations about review processes and resource constraints. Maybe another small batch of documents gets released, carefully curated to show progress without revealing anything too significant. The judge will likely continue accepting these explanations, trusting that DOJ is acting in good faith, because that's how the system works. Over the next several months, the pattern will probably be small releases, heavy redactions, lots of administrative updates, and persistent delays. Each time someone pushes back, whether it's members of Congress, journalists, or advocacy groups, DOJ will point to the complexity of the task, the sensitivity of the material, the need to protect victims and national security. But the deeper question is what this means for accountability in cases involving powerful individuals. Because the Epstein case isn't unique in this sense. It's just the most visible example of a larger pattern where institutional interests align to protect institutional players. According to legal precedent, when evidence of elite wrongdoing emerges, the system's default isn't exposure, it's containment. We saw it with Wall Street after 2008, where despite massive fraud, almost no executives faced prosecution. We saw it with intelligence community abuses revealed by whistleblowers, where the revelations led to reforms of disclosure processes, not accountability for the abuses themselves. We saw it with political corruption scandals that generate initial outrage, then get buried under procedural complexity until public attention wanes. In each case, the mechanism is similar. Acknowledge the problem, promise transparency, then use institutional processes to delay, redact, and compartmentalize until the story loses momentum. It's not conspiracy, it's system design. Institutions protect themselves and the people embedded in them. For citizens trying to understand what actually happened with Epstein's network, this means we're likely never going to get the clean, complete narrative we were promised. There will be revelations, certainly. There will be documents released, but there will also be massive gaps, strategic redactions, and records that conveniently can't be located or are determined to be too sensitive for public consumption. What this teaches us is that transparency doesn't happen because it's the law. It happens when there's sufficient political pressure, media attention, and public demand that the cost of withholding information exceeds the cost of releasing it. Right now, that equation favors delay. And here's what most people miss. The Epstein files aren't just about Epstein. They're about a network of power, influence, and compromise that implicated people across multiple sectors and countries. Fully releasing those files would necessarily expose not just individual wrongdoing, but systemic complicity. That's why the resistance is so strong. It's not protecting one person or even a handful of people. It's protecting a system. So here's what we're really looking at. This isn't a story about bureaucratic inefficiency. It's about institutional self-preservation, manifesting as procedural delay. The Department of Justice, operating under executive branch control, has the capacity, resources, and legal obligation to release these files. They're choosing not to, and they're using complexity as camouflage for that choice. At its core, this is about whether legal mandates mean anything when they threaten powerful interests. Congress passed a law. The law had a deadline. The deadline was missed by 7 weeks and counting. And the consequence is more letters promising to try harder. Going forward, the critical factor will be whether public pressure can overcome institutional inertia. If this story fades from public attention, if we accept it's complicated as sufficient explanation, then the files will trickle out slowly, heavily redacted, over a timeline measured in years, not weeks. But if citizens, journalists, and independent media platforms keep demanding the full, unredacted release that the law requires, if members of Congress continue pushing for mechanisms like a special master, then maybe, we get something closer to actual transparency. Keep an eye on the next document release. Look at what's redacted and why. Watch whether Bondi's explanations start to sound increasingly hollow as months pass, and ask yourself, if they can ignore a congressional deadline on something this significant, what else can they ignore? The stakes here are whether our legal system can compel transparency when it matters most, or whether institutional power can simply outlast legal obligation. Based on everything we've seen so far, that question is still very much open.